We are going to be the first age cohort that will have 1 million of us reach the age of 100. So what's that mean? It ain't over. In fact, it's worse than that. For those of us in our 50s and our 60s, many of us have to come to grips with the fact, I've got 25 to 35 more years of healthy living ahead of me. What am I supposed to do now? And for those of us that reached our high point when we were 19, we are so ready for a second act. And I'm telling you that that's what we're looking for, and that's what we're going to find. Because the group just ahead of us, I identify the group just ahead of us as the privates. Those that were born in the 30s and earlier 40s, who achieved so much in life but did it so much more quietly. And they are the ones who are beginning to redefine retirement. We now call it, I want to take this down, encore living. In fact, there's a website, a good one, encoreliving.com. Who is it for? It is for those people who say, I don't want to retire. For boomers, I can't retire. But who realize here is an opportunity to learn, to coach, to mentor, to teach, to engage in the great historian Robert Fogel calls a generation of vow work, as opposed to my earn work. And whether I get paid for that vow work or not, this is the time that I want this work to count. I don't want it to be in a cubicle. I don't want it to be nameless, faceless, and meaningless. And the powerful suggestion here is that while the private generation is showing the way, just think when tens of millions of us Woodstockers who are so ready for a redefinition, so ready for a second act, are unleashed on society and demanding meaningful activity. And there's a fourth source of this secular spiritualism. And it is, in fact, what the chief talked about. It is really an unwritten story of the greatness of the American people. Oh, look, I'm an historian, and I know all of the ugliness, and I taught it. But if you take another look, what you see is the story of sacrifice for larger causes, for World War I, for World War II. Don't forget, in the 1970s, two presidents, two different parties said to the American people, we've got a crisis. Put on a sweater, turn down the thermostat, make a sacrifice, and we did. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, testified before Congress, and she said, of course the American people will do that. It is part of our history. If the cause is right, if the leadership is there, and if they know that everybody else is required to do the same thing, they'll do it. And I want you to know that after the 70s, so much has been written about our selfishness and our waste, and so much of that is true. But I also want you to understand, because I was in a unique position. I was in business, doing this, polling, in 1984 and 85, and a lot of my early jobs were for planning departments in small towns and cities. I did the Springfields and the Watertowns and the Akron, Ohios, and the Wilkes-Barres. And I'd get called in and they'd say, you know, the state is mandating us to recycle. We don't think the people of, fill in the name of the town, are going to willingly recycle. And I'd go out, do the surveys, the focus groups come back and say, they'll do it. No, not here. Yeah, well, they will. They'll do it if it's right, if there's leadership, if it's mandatory, if they're sure everybody else is doing it. What happened? We recycle. That's a sacrifice. It's so different than what it was. We stopped smoking during this same period. Oh, sure, you're still going to see a kid light up a cigarette. But if you want to see how little we smoke in this country, go to Europe. Or anywhere else, for that matter. We stopped littering. We stopped littering. I remember in the 70s and early 80s, it was not uncommon to take a drive out in the country. There'd be a station wagon ahead of us. And people would dump entire bags of garbage out on the highway. I used to think that's how McDonald's advertised. And we stopped. In my book, I have a table on our behavior. There was a Gallup poll in 1979 at the height of the second energy crisis. And then my poll in 2007, the same questions. Do you turn the lights out when you leave a room? 2% said yes in 1979. 68% said yes in 2007. Not my kids. But there's so many questions that are like that, and you begin to see that we have indeed changed. We're ready for sacrifices, ready for great things. There is a growing understanding from the polling that we are not the only people on this planet anymore. And the people that I'm highest on are the 18 to 30-year-olds. I call them the first global citizens, and they are. 56% of our kids have passports and have traveled abroad. They are the group that is most likely to say, I'm a citizen of the planet Earth, than a citizen of the United States of America, and more likely than any other age cohort to say that. When I ask them, and this is a question I've asked for 20 years, because we've been polling young people for 2 decades, what's America going to look like 20 years from now? 3.5 years ago, that's very significant. The 18 to 30-year-olds volunteered this response more than anything else. Barack Obama. Why? Because he's one of us. He looks like us. He looks like my friends. They are multicultural, multidimensional. I'm waxing too eloquent. They're still a pain in the ass. I don't want you to think anything else. But there is something so exciting about the world that they live in.